Did you know some of the biggest companies like Uber don't actually own the product that they make profit from? And did you know you can make money from property without even owning it? To give a bit of background, my name is Ade. I'm 25 years old. I have sourced and sold over double digits when it comes to rent-to-rent deals. And I've just bought my first house, which I'm converting into a 6-bedroom, all-ensuite HMO. And today we're going to be talking about rent-to-rent and exactly what that is. I noticed my comments, a few people asked what rent-to-rent is, so I thought I'd do a little breakdown, giving a little explanation. Rent-to-rent in its simplest form is renting something from someone and then renting out again for a higher price and making sure you have profits. When it comes to property, you rent a property from a landlord and then you rent it out again for a higher price, making sure all your costs are covered and you're earning a good amount of profit. Essentially, you're controlling someone else's asset and making money from it. The best example of rent to rent, which you guys might know, is Enterprise. Enterprise is a company who literally rents out vans and cars to other people. But what Enterprise do is they go direct to supplier, for example, like Volkswagen, Mercedes, and they rent their vans or cars, whatever that is, and they just rent it out again. And that's exactly what we do when it comes to rent to rent, but in just a different strategy. When you think of rent to rent, how I like to think of it, imagine football. Football, you can play football in many different ways. You can play 4-4-2, you can play 4-3-3, you can play 3-5-2, and that's the same thing when it comes to rent to rent. It is a business strategy that can be done in many different ways. Now, when it comes to rent to rent and you think of it from a property strategy, there are two main types of this. One type is rent to rent HMO, which is known as house of multiple occupancy, and this is when you rent out the rooms on a room by room basis. Some people may know this as a house share or a student property. Another type is rent-to-rent service accommodation or rent-to-rent Airbnb, which some people might know better. This is where you rent out an entire property and you rent it out on a nightly basis to guests on short stay lets. To give a bit more context again, I've got a portfolio of rent-to-rent HMOs. I have done service accommodation before in the past, but it's not something I have really delved into too much. But I'm going to give an example of one of the deals when it comes to rent-to-rent HMO to give a bit more context and help you guys understand. So I've got a 7-bedroom property, with 7 rooms in the house. And I rent that property from the landlord paying 1,700. I know that all my bills are 850. So for example, gas, electrics, council tax, cleaner, broadband, and some other stuff like TV license and water bill. Which gives a total of 2,550. I know each of the rooms goes for £500 on average. I think it actually goes for a bit higher, but for simplicity, I've said 500. And so what we do now is do 500 times 7, which gives us a total of 3,500. That's the total revenue we're actually getting from the house. And then what we do next is we do 3,500, take away our total cost, 2,550, which gives us a total of £950 profit every single month. So that is rent-to-rent HMO, and that is the business model I'm currently operating in, and that's how I currently make my money. So because I don't have a rent-to-rent service accommodation deal right now, I brought my flatmate in here so he can talk through one of the deals he has to give a bit more context as well.
Right, okay, so when I got my first deal, it was quite a few years ago. These are some of the figures that we got up on the board. So I got an agreed rent of £915 a month to the landlord. This agreed on a 3-year deal. The bills, which includes the council tax, the broadband, cleaning fees, and the energy bills and the water bills, and sometimes a bit of maintenance as well, that comes to about £685. So my sort of break-even number is around £1,600. Now, these figures do fluctuate, which I'll go into a little bit further on, but that's sort of my break-even number. On average, my nightly rate is about £110 per night, and if I get that at 70% occupancy, so I'm doing this based on 30 days out of the month, so if I get that 70%, which is around 21 days, it will come to around £2,300 or 330. So it's going to be around there, and at 100%, it'd be about £3,300.
So when we talk about these 70% occupancy, that gives you an average £700 profit in a month. And then when we look at it from this perspective, it gives us an additional, gives you 1,700 profit in a month. So as you can see, when it comes to service accommodation, the profit can be a lot higher.
So yeah, like I said, the nightly rate, that can go up and down. It's very seasonal. So for example, in the summer months, between sort of like May all the all the way through to the end of September, your nightly rate can be a bit higher because it's really busy. Everyone's traveling and doing things in the summertime. They're going on staycations and holidays. And so your nightly rate can go a lot higher. Therefore, if you've got high occupancy, still at 70%, but your nightly rate might be £220, £25 per night, your profit will also go higher. But for example, in the sort of low months and low seasons, such as January and February, your nightly rate could dramatically drop to like £90 per month, per night, or £80 per night. So then your profit will go down. So across sort of 12 months, across the year, it's sort of, you'll have a break, you'll sort of have a medium, as you will.
So as a whole, when it comes to service accommodation, as mentioned before, the profits can fluctuate depending on the season, depending on the situation. Even with your costs, when it comes to guests, depending on how long a guest stays, it affects how many times your cleaner has to go there, which can increase your cost or decrease your cost as a thing. So when it comes to rent-to-rent HMO, it's more of a situation where you have a long-term tenants and you have more of a stable income, knowing exactly what's going to come in every single month. When it comes to Airbnb, it's more of a situation where you have nightly guests and the profit fluctuates a bit more because it depends on the occupancy rates, the time of the year, and there's a lot more factors when it comes to it. Rent to rent as a whole, when it comes to service accommodation and the HMO, I think HMO is a lot simpler to get, but service accommodation, there's a lot more out there, and it also can be a lot more profitable. So guys, I hope that gives a little bit more context to the difference between rent-to-rent HMO and rent-to-rent service accommodation. And when it comes to the benefits of rent-to-rent in general, rent-to-rent tends to be a lot lower startup costs. It's a lot better compared to putting a fat deposit on a house, for example, paying 30 grand, 40 grand, or whatever that is. When it comes to the deposit, you're looking at about £1,000, and in some situations, no deposit to actually secure a rent-to-rent deal. One of the benefits for me when it comes to rent-to-rent is that it gave me a lot of experience in regards to managing a HMO, what to look for when it comes to a good HMO deal, and it allowed me to build relationships with agents all around the city. So for example, now I know agents that I can talk to where they solely rely on me when it comes to rent-to-rent deals, as well as that when I start looking for purchasing houses, I know I can go to certain people in regards to getting guidance and directions and even get off-the-market deals. I'm not going to lie to you guys, there are some challenges when it comes to rent-to-rent. Rent-to-rent is not passive as much as everyone says it is online. It's a lot more passive than a 9 to 5. For example, I right now have a virtual assistant and she works 3 hours a day, 5 days a week. And she manages over 60 units when it comes to rent-to-rent deals. And that's literally something I've taught her and she does quite well for me. Prior to that, I used to manage all my properties by myself whilst having a full-time job. Even to this day, which a lot of people don't know about me, I still have a full-time job as a business analyst and I still manage all my different HMO units as well as manage my property development. Another challenge when it comes to rent is that it is a lot of responsibility. For example, the HMO deal that I mentioned before, where the rent was $1,700, a lot of people don't feel comfortable with that. And what a lot of people do say is, what if I can't rent my rooms out? And that's where due diligence and knowing your numbers and knowing how to source a good HMO deal comes into place. When I first got started, I was terrified when it comes to renting out my rooms. And now, if you just tell me a certain location, give me a postcode, let me do a little bit of due diligence, for 10 minutes, I know what rent's out, easy peasy, and I have every bit of confidence regardless of whatever that rent is, whether that's £5,000, £8,000, as long as I know my numbers work, I'm quite confident to move forward with a deal. To close everything off, rent to rent is when you control someone else's assets and you make money for it without actually owning it at all. And rent to rent HMO is a strategy where you have long-term tenants and you rent out your rooms on a room-by-room basis, which is a lot more stable income. Whereas rent to rent service accommodation is when you rent out your rooms on a nightly rate to guests, where you can have higher profit margins, but they also fluctuate quite a bit. I hope this is giving you guys a lot of context what rent to rent is, and it's provided a lot of clarity as well, and it might be the business model that you guys dive into next. If you ever want any tips or help when it comes to rent, I do a lot of videos on my Instagram and TikTok explaining how to source the deal, how to check the demand, and anything when it comes to rent as a whole. So do check me out. My socials is AdeXBeecroft on every single platform. If you like this video, like and subscribe so I know what you guys are interested in. Thank you very much. Deuces.